Hello, welcome to On Wildlife. I'm your host, Alex Ray. On this podcast, we bring the wild to you. We take you on a journey into the life of a different animal every week, and I guarantee you're going to come out of here knowing more about your favorite animal than you did before. This week is really exciting because I had the opportunity to speak to Ben King, who is the recovery officer at the Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Trust for the animal that we're going to be talking about today. We're talking about a frog that you probably haven't heard of unless you live in the UK. So grab some boots, because we're heading to the ponds of England to talk about pool frogs. You can identify a pool frog from other types of frogs by looking at their patterns. They have a pale stripe that runs down their back, which other frogs don't have. And if you want to see a really great picture of one, check out our Instagram page at On Wildlife. And pool frogs are also really interesting animals because they were once thought to be extinct. They were declared extinct in 1995, but now we know that that's not true. But their numbers are still extremely low, and luckily Ben and the Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Trust are working to recover their populations. Ben has his master's degree in zoo conservation biology and has worked on the conservation of multiple other species throughout his life. So I can't wait for you guys to hear him talk about not only pool frogs, but just conservation in general. So stick around for that interview after the break. The person that I want to recognize in this week's episode of Notable Figures in Science is Benjamin Banneker. He was born in 1731, and his mother was a freed slave. He was kind of a jack of all trades when it came to science, studying everything from astronomy to insects. He used mathematical calculations to predict the timing of eclipses, and he wrote multiple almanacs that showed his calculations. When he died, most of his work was destroyed in a fire, but one of his journals was able to be recovered. In this journal, he wrote about how cicadas emerge in large numbers every 17 years, and he also made observations about honeybee behaviors. But one of his greatest accomplishments was that he actually built the first clock in America. He was one of the greatest scientists of his time. And if you want to learn more about Benjamin Banneker or this series in general, check out onwildlife.org. Okay, we're back. Here's my interview with Ben King. Hi, Ben. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you. And yourself?
I'm great. I'm so excited. I'm so happy you were able to come onto the podcast. Thank you so much again for coming on.
No, honestly, it's a real pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So, first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in pool frogs?
Yeah, so I'm an early career conservationist, so I'm quite young, but I'm in Britain, so obviously you're American. Um, I have a background in mainly zoos, so I have a master's in zoo conservation from the University of Plymouth. That is linked with Peyton Zoo Environmental Wildlife Park and the Wild Planet Trust. Now, right now, I am the ARC Bullfrog Recovery Project Officer. The reason I'm interested in bullfrogs is because of their whole story. They, as we will talk later on, they went extinct from Britain back in the 90s. And I'm really interested because it's been really successful reintroducing them. And it allows me to combine both my zoo sort of knowledge and ex situ conservation with real conservation impacts and releases to the wild.
Awesome. Yeah, and I really can't wait to get talking about that. So we'll definitely talk about that later on in the podcast. So you also work with the Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Trust, like you were talking about. So can you just explain your role a little bit more there?
Yeah, of course. My role right now, I only started a couple months ago, but because of the nature of the project, my role is constantly changing, it feels. When people say there's no 2 days the same, it's because everything's changing all the time, I feel. Um, so my main sort of priorities are to lead on the captive rearing of tadpoles. So this is obviously for the bullfrogs. Right now, everything has been set up, and we are waiting for them to spawn, so that we can take the eggs and try and do our best to raise as many little frogs as possible. So right now, that is a big part of my job, is preparing the whole facility. Right now, I'm trying to liaise with volunteers to make sure that we have the help to actually do it. And then when the time comes, we'll be actually head starting and looking after these tadpoles. The other main task I have is monitoring at the sites. So currently there's 2 reintroduction sites. There we're doing count surveys, and we will be doing count surveys and capture surveys of the bullfrogs. They've actually just started to emerge from hibernation the last couple of weeks, which is great. Great to see them out. Great to start hearing them calling as well. And then in the future, as I say, everything's constantly changing. So in the future, obviously, very soon, we're hoping that we'll be securing spawn. We also really are trying to find future sites for reintroductions. Right now, as I say, there's only 2 sites, which is really successful, but we would like to expand the range of these frogs. And we're also looking into other ex situ conservation organizations such as zoos, and seeing how we can get them involved. And then finally, it's communications. So trying to explain why the bullfrog's important and reach out to wider audiences.
Awesome. And it must be so amazing to kind of just be a part of that reintroduction process and actually going out into the field and helping them be reintroduced into the wild. So I can't imagine how great that must be.
Yeah, honestly, I feel really like this job. It is really good fun, as well as knowing you are doing a really important job. So I really couldn't hope for a better job right now.
That's great. And you were talking about how you're actually getting to go into the fields. So frogs are known for their mating calls. Do pool frogs have a recognizable noise that they make that you can really identify and know that this is definitely a pool frog?
Well, I've got the little clip here if you'd like to hear it. I don't know how good it will be on audio.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. It's just really distinctive. It's really nice. When we obviously, one of the reasons we are monitoring the other amphibians as well is to make sure that as we're out there, we know when the bullfrogs are starting to emerge and when they stop breeding. So when we first heard our first bullfrog, me and Emily, the project assistant, we were just sat eating lunch, and all of a sudden we heard the frog calling right behind us, which was really strange but really cool.
That it always comes when you're least expecting it.
Yeah,
um,
I don't know how the weather's been in America right now, but the spring here has been really sort of unusually cold, and that's for Britain.
yeah.
So the frogs are emerging slightly later than we were expecting, but like I say, it's great to finally hear and see them out and about.
The reason why pool frogs need warmer weather is because they're ectotherms, meaning that their body temperature relies on the outside temperature.
It's sort of interesting because bullfrogs really like hot temperatures, but because of that, it makes it really nice that we can pick and choose when we do our surveys. The best days will be the nice days. So if it's raining and cold, we might go out and see absolutely nothing. So there's not much point of doing it. You wait until the nice days and go out there, get on with the other work that you can do on the bad days.
Wow, that really just works out for you.
Yeah, it does. It's really ideal.
And how do you identify a pool frog from any other type of frog?
Yeah, so the habitat for bullfrogs is actually quite specific. So they really like, it's called a pingo, and it's back in the past ice age, about 10 to 12,000 years ago. These little pingos were created by the ice retreating, and this basically is ideal habitat where the bullfrog inhabited. Um, and so they like sort of open habitats that have these pools. Generally, you need grazing animals that will graze and keep the sort of plant and tree shrubs down. But it's great if there's surrounding woodlands, which is ideal. This is why we picked both sites, because they're great for the actual bullfrogs. The other thing with common frog, obviously, the only other species in Britain of frog is the common frog. And just from its name, it's really obvious that it is really widespread. They're really generous and they're really successful. But the common frog's Latin name is Rana. I don't want to get this wrong. Rana temperaria. And basically, the temperaria means they generally like to spawn in temporary ponds, and that's basically because there's less aquatic predators for them, and they're tadpoles. But the bullfrog much prefers a sort of a very permanent pond. It's always going to be there, and they just generally like the deeper waters.
Oh, okay, that's really interesting. And you were also talking about how they are coming out of hibernation soon, at least. So, how does that process work for bullfrogs? How is the hibernation process working for them?
As I say, they came out a couple of weeks ago, so around the end of April. They generally hibernate though from October all the way until about this time, and that's just because Britain is really quite cold. They've been tucked away all nice and warm. Like I say, they like sort of open habitat, but with mixed woodland nearby. And this is exactly why the sites we have chosen to reintroduce them have been picked. And basically, it provides a great hibernation site. They can hibernate in the leaf litter. And generally, they like it when the pools are within about 250 to within a few hundred meters of the ponds. They don't like traveling massively far from the ponds, and it means it's really easy for them to get back when the breeding season comes around again.
Oh, that's great. And I never really thought about frogs where they go during the winter time. So it's interesting to know that they do hibernate.
Yes, yeah. Particularly in Britain. To be honest, I'm not sure. I'm assuming tropical species don't, but here in Britain, yeah, the frogs hibernate. It just gets too cold.
Yeah, you're gonna need to.
Yeah.
um, and are there any other cool adaptations that pool frogs have that kind of make them stand out?
So there's a few little quirks they have. So as we were saying with the communication, they are actually the only frog in Britain that has two vocal sacs, and so it's on either side of their jaw. We sent you a really nice photo of it, so hopefully people can see it. And these are always white in a northern bullfrog. Other sort of bullfrogs or other introduced species, it's more coloured and it varies. But in a bullfrog, in a northern bullfrog, it is always white. The other thing is because they hibernate. Other common frogs do hibernate, but they come out much earlier in the year, and so it means the bullfrogs are breeding much later. They also have spawn clumps that are very small in comparison to common frogs, and they're equivalent to about a walnut in size. They're quite unusual because any other amphibians in this country, or any other frogs or toads in this country, their eggs are generally black in colour or very dark, whereas a bullfrog has half of it's browny, darkish, but then the other side is very white and creamy coloured. It's quite strange, but it's very distinctive when you see it.
Frog eggs need to be in the water for the most part, and they look like big clumps of clear gelatin with black dots inside. Those black dots are the embryos.
And also, because they obviously breed later in the year, their tadpoles have to grow very quickly, but they grow to a much larger size than common frogs, so they can get quite chunky. They can get to about 8 centimeters when they start metamorphosizing into little froglets. Yeah.
That's really cool. And are they important to the ecosystems that they live in any sort of way?
It's a really tricky question to answer because there's so many factors. I always think of it as how is a species important with their ecosystem services and how do they fit inside the ecosystem? So bullfrogs, they're really important just as for any amphibian, they're really important in the stability and resilience of ecosystems. So this partly is down to the food web and the energy dynamics they have. They're also really important in regulating prey populations. We know at sites they generally like invertebrate prey, but they also, for some reason, they like flying insects. And at the sites, we know as we've experienced, there's lots of mosquitoes and midges. So if they're controlling them, we're more than happy. Uh, yeah.
And the rest of the world is too.
Yes, exactly. I think any amphibians that are doing it are very much appreciated. But generally, there's so many different sort of aspects that you can look at. And for example, all these predators and prey that I've just mentioned, they've all got their own implications as well on the ecosystem. Um, as I say, bullfrogs are sort of low in abundance now in comparison to other amphibians, but they're really that makes them really key environmental indicators. So it's really easy to see if the bullfrog population there's something's wrong, if something's not going right, which luckily it is going right. But it would be really easy to see if there's anything wrong with the ecosystem health or quality in any way. And obviously, with the bullfrogs specifically, we as a charity, we're trying to recover this species, but in order to do that, we have to have the habitat. And again, this is a massive sort of part of the whole ecosystem. If we have the healthy habitat, we're going to have healthy bullfrogs.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like they do a lot. They are a prey species, and they also help to keep other populations down. And without them, it could cause an imbalance in that food web.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, amphibians in general are really sort of amazing creatures, but yeah, there's so many sort of applications we could have. For example, many amphibians have sort of biological chemicals that have been used in sort of anti-cancer, anti-sort of viral compounds that could be real, but you don't know that unless you test on the species. Obviously, I'm not suggesting we do test on a really critically endangered species, but you would never know. So yeah, having them is really important because there's so many potential sort of benefits of having them that you don't fully appreciate until they're gone.
Yeah, and they're not only benefits to the ecosystem, but just like you said, to us too.
Exactly.
We
Yeah.
could use them
Exactly.
for our own benefit. And going off of that question, pool frogs were once announced to be extinct in the wild in the 90s. So obviously they're not anymore. So what kind of efforts have you been taking to change that?
As I say, the bullfrog's a really sort of interesting case study because there are introduced species in Britain. To be honest, the bullfrog was always believed to be an invasive species that had been introduced. But back in 2000, as we say, they went extinct in the 90s. But back in 2005, researchers from within ARC published a paper basically proving that the northern bullfrog was a native species. And basically, from this study, it came that Britain wanted to reintroduce bullfrog. So the first reintroduction occurred in 2005. And like I say, bullfrogs were taken from Sweden with permission from the Swedish government. They were house screened out there to make sure they weren't going to introduce any diseases. And they were brought back to Norfolk, back in East Anglia, in the southeast of England. And since then, they've been breeding at the site really well. They've been surviving really well, and they've been really successful. The second reintroduction happened in 2015 at a place called Thompson Common, again in Norfolk, not very far away. And that was actually the last place that northern bullfrogs were known to occur before they went extinct in the 90s. And this was actually done rather than bringing more frogs from Sweden. The frogs at the first site had spawn head started, and it was the young of that was reintroduced to Thompson Common. So how we're planning on doing it is actually a proven way of establishing more colonies. During all this time, there's been constant sort of population monitoring to make sure the frogs are doing really well, and there's also disease monitoring that's linked with the Institute of Zoology at the Zoological Society of London, who owns London Zoo. They've been really amazing, making sure that everything's sort of, we're not introducing any new diseases that could be really harmful to either the populations or other native species. Yeah, I keep saying the sort of first and second reintroduction sites. As I said, the second reintroduction site is Thompson Common. The first one is still sort of hidden because obviously the frogs are so rare. It would be very easy, even if it was an enthusiastic individual. It would be really easy if someone collected a lot of frogs just because they were really interested or wanted to keep them as pets. It would be really easy for them to damage the whole population.
Oh,
So
wow.
it is still quite confidential. So yeah, I'm not allowed to say about the first site. Even we refer to it as Site X. So yeah, it is almost ground zero. That is where we are working from, which is really exciting. But obviously, there's reasons why we have to be careful.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing, and it kind of shows you how even when you think a population is done extinct, there could still be a way to rehabilitate that population into the habitat that it once lived in. It kind of gives me hope for other species as well.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. There was a lot of management work. And like I say, that was a really quick summary of the whole work that's been done. There's
Yeah.
been so many partners over the years. I wouldn't want to sort of mention lots because obviously I feel so guilty if I left anyone out. But yeah, it's been a really successful project, and I think it's a really good case study of how a species can be reintroduced. Um, but having said that, it's been really closely monitored, and we are really targeting the northern bullfrogs, which are known to be native, whereas the continental ones from more southern in Europe are known to not be. So yeah, we want to keep the genetics really pure.
Yeah, and that goes to show that it takes a lot of work and planning to do this. So if we really want to make some change, we got to get a lot of people to really care about it, just like you guys do
Yeah,
with the pool frogs.
yeah, definitely. I mean, like I say, we're focusing on one specific species, but it's having massive benefits for the whole ecosystem. It's not just we want to save the species for the sake of saving the species. It's
Uh-huh.
to benefit everything, which I think is really great.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm sure a lot of people are hearing this and they're thinking, how can we help pool frogs? So is there anything that the average person can do to help them?
Well, as a charity, we are run on donations. We need sort of funding, unfortunately, for all this great work. We can't do it for free, unfortunately, which would be lovely if we could. Yeah, it's just not how the world works.
Yeah.
But when I think more broadly, it's not just the bullfrogs that can be helped by an average person. It's also partly what shouldn't you do. Um, so, like, as I say, we have vets and sort of biologists at the Institute of Zoology who do all this disease testing. Um, and basically, we're trying to stop any sort of potential disease risk. So, just if if you please don't sort of go releasing all your pet frogs or sort of using a nets in the wild that could be transferring anything to wild populations of frogs. Again, just don't go out collecting a load of known sort of endangered species. It's really sort of straightforward things. It's very easy for a few individuals to create quite a large impact.
Yeah, I completely agree, and it's really easy just to not try and tamper with what's out in the environment. You can observe from afar and enjoy that, but make sure that you're not interfering with anything.
No, definitely. I'm not saying don't go out. It's lovely, honestly. Thompson Common, the site we released the frogs, it is off public, so the people generally can't get to the frogs. However, the actual common is in quite a large area, and the frogs. My manager John Baker, he's heard frogs calling at ponds that are accessible to the locals. So clearly they are expanding their range, and it's honestly it's amazing if you can go and hear them calling and see them. I mean, it's great to sort of get out in nature and sort of really enjoy the benefits that these natural ecosystems bring. It's just being sensible and not sort of introducing diseases or non sort of native species. For example, there is known American bullfrogs in Britain, which obviously shouldn't be here, but they've made it here somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, so some pet owner probably decided they were going to release their
Yeah,
bullfrog. Not a great idea.
Well,
Um,
obviously, it's not an ideal result, but again, I don't think no one's doing this maliciously. It's just
yeah, yeah.
lack of sort of understanding almost, which hopefully things like this podcast should help enlighten people, help educate
Yeah,
people why they should.
I hope so.
Yes.
I really hope so. So before you go, where can we find information about the Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Trust?
Yeah, so obviously we have our website, so it's www.arc-trust.org. There is loads of great information there. There's all the sort of work we do, all the projects. The Pool Frogs has a specific project page, but there's many other projects we run. There's also just general facts and sort of just there's lots of sort of training and education resources. The other thing is obviously we have a lot of social media accounts. So we have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. So it's great if we can gain support through that.
Yeah, definitely. Everybody should absolutely go check them out.
Yeah.
And Ben, thank you so much for coming on to the show again. I really learned a lot, and I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge.
No, brilliant. Thank you very much for having me. And hopefully I taught you a few things.
You did.
Brilliant.
More than a few.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
I don't know about you guys, but that interview really made me want to support conservation efforts. The fact that they were able to start recovering pool frog populations when they were thought to be extinct makes you really feel like it's never too late to help out. You should absolutely go check out the Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Trust. And frogs everywhere are struggling right now, which is why you should also check out Save the Frogs and the Amphibian Survival Alliance. Thank you so much for coming on this adventure with me as we explored the world of pool frogs. You can find the sources that we used for this podcast and links to organizations that we reference at onwildlife.org. You can also email us with any questions at onwildlife.podcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram at on_wildlife and on TikTok at onwildlife. Don't forget to tune in next Wednesday for another awesome episode. And that's On Wildlife.
You've been listening to On Wildlife with Alex Ray. On Wildlife provides general educational information on various topics as a public service, which should not be construed as professional, financial, real estate, tax, or legal advice. These are our personal opinions only. Please refer to our full disclaimer policy on our website for full details.